Hey, Cam followers, massive apologies that we're late. We were supposed to start at 7, but unfortunately I got caught on call and it all goes wrong. So the amazing Andrea has been super patient whilst I scallywag around trying to get our live up and running. I'm really excited to present to you the awesome Andrea Tarr, who runs an independent advisory service called Veterinary Prescriber. And she is really kind to be giving her time to us tonight to talk about pharmacology of OA and the new developments. And we're going to add into it a lot about how drugs come to market, strengths, weaknesses, how to use them appropriately. So I hope everybody will find a lot of benefit. Before I let Andrea introduce herself and talk about herself, I want to just remind you all that we have a shop, because do remember that Cam is independent and we do our level best to self-fund so that we are completely non-biased in the information that we put out there. And the only way we're going to carry on doing this is if you guys support us. And we give you every opportunity. You can donate, you can buy our children's book, you can pop to our shop, you can employ our services in practice training, consultancy, owner workshops. We have an education center. We are completely self-sufficient. The only thing we lack is your support. So please do head over to the Cam shop, see what there takes your fancy, knowing that you keep Cam going. Enough of that. Now you tell us all about you, Andrea.
Well, good evening, Hannah. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for inviting me. My name is Andrea Tarr. I am a pharmacist by profession. That's my background. I've been a registered pharmacist for about 38 years now. But as well as being a pharmacist, I'm a specialist in medicines information. I started out, like most pharmacists do, working on the human medicine side. I started out in hospital medicine. That's where I specialized in medicines information. I worked for a bit in the pharmaceutical industry, but for a big bit of my career, I worked on an independent medical publication that produced independent information on medicines for doctors. It was sort of over time, I came to understand that there was a need as well for independent information on veterinary medicines. And that was particularly emphasized when a vet wrote to the publication I used to work on saying, vets could do with impartial information on veterinary medicines too. Could you produce something for us? So that's what gave me the idea of starting Veterinary Prescriber. It's a unique resource. What we do is publish independent reviews of medicines. So the way we do that is to gather all the evidence and integrate that with other types of information about medicines, like regulatory information and practical information. I'm an expert on medicines, but I'm an expert on medicines information, but I'm not actually an expert on any particular medicines, nor do I treat animals, and I'm not a vet. So I work very closely with vets who, provide the sort of veterinary side. So really what we do is, because medicines information on medicines is kind of all over the place. I mean, there's regulatory information, there's clinical trials information, there's information about licensed medicines, information on unlicensed medicines, there's promotion. And like Cam, we're completely independent. And that means being independent of the pharmaceutical industry. So we don't take any sponsorship or advertising. And that means that we can be objective in the way that we review medicines. We can talk about the disadvantages as well as the advantages, and we can point out where the gaps in the evidence are and what the uncertainties are, so on.
Yeah, and it's really, any veterinary professionals that are listening, is a really easily accessible resource. So you can sign up. You can sign up as an individual or as a practice, and you have modules, and you find yourself reading about things that you possibly wouldn't have gone and sought out, but you'll find very enlightening because it's your day-to-day work. And there's a number of things that I think we accept and we don't often question. And then when you look at an Andrea review, like, whoa, I didn't know that. That's interesting. So it's a really fantastic resource. And as I say, you can sign up as an individual or you can sign up as a practice. and great newsletters. So do consider that, and we'll put all the links and details after tonight in the thread. I'm sorry if the connection is a little bit twitchy. It was absolutely fine just before we went live, but every now and then it glitches a little bit. So apologies, but stick with it. Do not go anywhere. We're going to crack straight on. And what we're going to do is have a brief overview of the topic, blah, 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 blah. Can you see I'm prompting myself? I will reminisce over the last 20 years I've been a vet. I remember there just being Metacam. So actually, I've been a vet for 20 years now. And when I started straight out of uni, their choice of medications for osteoarthritis were very limited. And I can remember it was carprofen and meloxicam. And their trade names were Metacam and Rimadyl. And that was it. And now we look at the plethora of medications that are regularly used, and I'm going to share your slide so people can be tantalized, that are used in chronic pain, chronic musculoskeletal pain management. And that is quite a traumatic change in 20 years, as far as I can see. Would you agree, Andrea?
Yeah, I agree. Yes. So, you know, we've got the way I've organized this is that on the kind of left-hand side, those are sort of the licensed medicines, and the ones in the list on the far right are kind of unlicensed medicines. So, yeah, including them all, there is a very wide, you know, there's a lot to choose from now.
Yeah, and within that is also what I was talking about previously was very non-steroidal only. But now I feel that people have a much better understanding about chronic pain management, that we're bringing in different pharmaceutical families, approaching it from different angles, which you've demonstrated in the way that you've laid out this slide as well. So we've got quite a lot to talk about. So please, you know, obviously do get your questions in. Don't be shy. It's always good to have a bit more interactive. Do let us know where you're listening from. That always makes me feel very warm inside. And it makes us feel that these evenings are very worth it. So tell us where you are. Right. So let's start off with the non-steroidals. And our key point here is the growth and development of non-steroidals, describing the journey from the non-specific to the COX-2 selective. Can you explain what's happened over the last 20 to 30 years with our use of anti-inflammatories?
Yeah, well, and the way COX, the main mode of action of, sorry, I didn't jump straight into it then. The main mode of action of the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs is that they inhibit an enzyme called cyclooxygenase, which is an important enzyme involved in the pain and inflammation pathway. So it was about the 1990s when it was discovered that there were two main types of this enzyme, COX-1 and COX-2. And it was thought that COX-1 was seen as the sort of good COX, because it's present in most of the cells in the body and seemed to be involved in in keeping bodily processes, you know, ticking over properly, protecting the body, protecting the gut, the kidney, and so on. So it was seen as sort of a good enzyme, whereas COX-2 was the one that seemed to be, that became active at times when inflammatory processes were going on. So the people who were looking at drug development thought, well, if we can find drugs that only target COX-2 and leave COX-1 alone, then we'll get rid of, because what we haven't said to begin with is that, you know, NSAIDs are effective, but they do have, you know, rates of typical side effects that, you know, that we're familiar with, like on the gastrointestinal tract, and they can affect kidney function in certain circumstances. So developers were looking for drugs that would only inhibit COX-2 and leave COX-1 alone. And that's where the idea of COX selectivity, COX-2 selectivity came in. But it's not as unfortunately, not as simple as all that, because now it's recognized that thinking of, you know, COX-1 is good, COX-1 is bad, is an oversimplification, really. And, you know, it's since been discovered that, you know, things are much more complicated than that, really, and that even COX-2 is involved in maybe has some anti-inflammatory activity. and also the fact that non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, have other effects as well. So it's not just about what they do to COX. And also the whole idea of so that led to the development of different sort of chemical groups of non-steroidals that were found to be more or less COX-2 selective. And there's the group that end in ib, like cimicoxib, firocoxib. They're the ones that are known as sort of COX-2 selective. But there is a problem with the whole area in that there's no standardization of what is meant by COX selective or COX preferential or whatever. And the studies looking at COX selectivity are done in sort of laboratories, and drugs are found to be kind of 5 times or 300 times or 500 times more COX-2 selective. But that doesn't necessarily translate to what happens in the human or dog's body. So really, it doesn't. So we really need to study the drugs in
real life setting, don't you?
Yes, exactly, to find out, what happens, and really in dogs anyway. We've got are there 8 licensed non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs now that are listed in that slide, and really there's no evidence in dogs that any one is more effective or safer than any other, really.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting because I can remember when I qualified from uni, I definitely in 2000, 2002, there was a real belief that we'd found the holy grail, and COX-2 specific, COX-2 selective, they were the go-to, and they were just going to change the face of anti-inflammatory safety and efficacy. And then I can remember actually, no, it's not that simple. Actually, COX-2 enzyme's still quite important. It's not only related to inflammation, it has housekeeping roles. So these COX-2 specific and COX-2 selective new medications still could lead to adverse events. And people were so disappointed. We've been so excited, we'd nailed it. And it was like, oh, no, they still can. On that note, I am going to butt in massively because there is definitely a big contingency online that go, all anti-inflammatories bad. And whenever we do a CAM post, we'll have people pop up and go, my dog didn't tolerate it, so I think they're the devil's drug. And that is not true. Unfortunately, there is just these idiosyncratic reactions. Some dogs do not respond well to them. And that isn't because the drug is bad. It's just an individualistic thing.
Yeah.
But when you look at the data that we have to have quick, efficacious, and pretty damn safe medications, non-steroidals do still lead the pack on that information. So just before anybody goes, oh no, they're the devils, reincarnate, they're not.
Yeah.
So then just carrying what Andrew is saying, then there was a belief that the more specific they were, as you said, so selective for COX-2, like 427 times more likely to affect COX-2 than COX-1. And people were like, oh, that must mean it's so much better. And that hasn't panned out either, has it? So
no, exactly.
And I think a big take home that we have repeated again and again from the specialist is there is not one out there that is always superior. It is very individualistic.
Yeah.
And I think when somebody comes to CAM and says, well, I've tried, say, meloxicam and it was so-so, but I kept getting a little bit of diarrhea, we then say, well, have a washout period, consider another one. And if they then say, oh, it's the same, we say, have a washout period and consider another one, because they are very individualistic, aren't they?
Yes. It's the same in humans and same in dogs. For some reason, one, if you don't respond to one, you might respond to another. It could be that, they are different molecules, so they may be having slightly different effects on, things that we don't know about. So it's true that, overall, they are the group of drugs for the treatment of inflammation and pain that there is the most evidence on in terms of efficacy and about which we know most about the adverse effects, because they are the best studied out of that whole range. And
I think that's a really good point. Can we just emphasize that point? Because I think a lot of people don't realize this. Is when something has a very good list of adverse events, it means it's been really well studied.
Yes.
And when you see a product out there that's got no adverse events, you're like, no one's recorded any data on it. So just because a product actually has a long list of adverse events, that actually could mean that it's been better studied and we know more about it than another product that doesn't seem to have that many adverse events.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to, it'd be good to talk about that a bit later on when we talk about how drugs get to market, perhaps a bit, and talk about, why it is that we have such limited information about the side effect profile of a drug when it's first marketed.
Yeah,
but I want to make.
Is it worth doing that now that we've tantalized
them? Do that now, yeah, okay.
Do it.
I mean, what I want to say first of all is that with medicines, the use of medicines is all about balancing the benefit against the risk, because any medicine, I mean, the definition of a medicine in regulatory terms is something that has an effect in the body. So anything that has an effect in the body is probably going to be doing something else in the body, because drugs aren't so specific that they only affect one thing. And things, chemicals and substances, enzymes in the body, they have multiple effects. So it isn't so specific that it's not going to affect other things. And that's why regulation is important. Regulation is there to ensure the safety of the animals or humans being treated. And going through the regulatory process, cuts out what they're looking at is the overall benefit versus the risk. So, and drugs will only get a license if the benefit, as proven in clinical trials, outweighs the risk in terms of what we know about the adverse effects at that time. And then once the drug is on the market, it's the vet then who's making a judgment about the benefit versus the risk in the individual animal, because the individual animal will have, specific characteristics that will mean that, a drug may be, more likely or less likely to cause adverse effects, or more likely or less likely to be beneficial. So there's always the weighing the benefit against the risk. So if we talk about what happens before a drug comes on the market, drugs have to go. If a company wants to market a medicine, it has to apply for a marketing authorization from the veterinary medicines regulatory body, which in this country is the Veterinary Medicines Directorate. And to do so, they have to provide a huge, enormous amount of data and proof of the quality, the safety, and the efficacy of the product. And the quality in particular, they have to prove where they're getting the raw materials from. They have to prove how they're manufacturing the product, that it's going to be, each batch is going to be consistent, that it contains exactly what it says it contains. So that's the quality. We can, so we can be sure of that. They have to do safety studies. So those are things like, toxicology. They have to give sort of overdoses to find out what happens if, if too much of the drug is given. They have to do studies over a certain, number of months. And then they have to do efficacy studies. And those are studies that, well, first of all, they have to sort of prove in sort of healthy animals and laboratory studies that the drug has the sort of pharmacological effect that it's expected to have. And then they have to do clinical trials, and they're called field clinical trials, in the animals that have the disease that the drug is going to be used to treat. But in for veterinary medicines, in general, clinical trials, they're usually one or two big clinical trials, which involve a total of about 500 or 600. Well, if it's about, is it dogs? We'll say dogs. so, you know, those are quite big studies, and they will be large enough to they will have been large enough to show that that the drug has an effect, if it has an effect. But could you show the slide with the numbers about adverse effects on, which is just a few on from here? Oh, more than I thought.
There you go.
That's the one. I hope you can see that. So this is just, look, I'm not a statistician, right? But these are the numbers that correspond to the sort of the risk of the adverse event. So in that table there, it's showing that if you want to, with a high degree of certainty, find the sort of a common adverse effect, and that would be one that occurs in, say, 1 in 100 treated dogs, then you would need a trial that included 300 dogs to pick up that common adverse effect. And then if it's an uncommon effect, the one that occurs in 1 in 1,000 dogs, you need a trial that includes 3,000 animals. So if we get down to rare adverse effects, which occur, about 1 in 10,000 treated animals, you're not going to find it unless about 30,000 animals have been treated. So I've just said that typically, the clinical trials that are done before a drug gets to market has been trialed in about 600 dogs, which would be, sort of, fairly typical of dogs that have the disease that the drug is going to be treating. So you can see when that's nowhere near the number that you need to pick up
adverse events.
Common, yeah. So
I think a lot of people need to know that a lot of the clinical trials that do get referred to, both in medicine, in interventions such as intra-articular, such as supplements, might only have 16 dogs in them. It's quite terrifying, the extrapolations that we take from a trial that has 8 dogs in it.
And that may be powered to show nothing really. It may not be powered to even. It may be a chance, because there's always a play of chance in clinical trials. So, a trial of that size, well, it's certainly not going to tell you anything about. So
when it comes to market, so for example, our monoclonal antibody, it's come out into clinical use, but they're still collecting data.
Yes, that's the thing about regulation, and for a licensed medicine, part of the regulatory process is, part of the role of the regulatory authority is to continue to monitor the safety of the product while it's on the market. So that is the best way that we can collect information and learn more about the safety of a drug. So once a drug is on the market, then it's going to be started to be used in a much, much bigger number of
relevant population as well.
Yeah, well, exactly, yes, because in clinical trials, they usually exclude animals with concurrent diseases, or maybe very old animals, very young animals, or maybe animals that have got severe osteoarthritis. But when a drug is on the market, it's going to be used in all kinds of animals. It's going to be used with other treatments, perhaps, which hasn't happened before the drug was on the market. So all these new things are happening with the medicine. So that's why the process of monitoring safety, which is called pharmacovigilance, is so important, because that's how we're going to find out about trials. So reporting adverse effects is crucial. That it's so important that's done, and it's not done enough. It's thought that adverse effects are really markedly underreported. And in this country,
I think a lot of us, I think vets are very busy. I think owners don't feel it's their role to report an adverse event. What we're hoping to do in the new CAM website is create a portal into an adverse event reporting procedure, so people just feel less intimidated, because it's quite intimidating, you know, the whole the VMD kind of like adverse event reporting structure. We're just going to try and make it a little bit more cushioned so people don't get so scared. I think it is difficult, and I think what we're trying to do here, guys, is just make you realize that there is a lot that we do know, and there's still also a lot that we don't know. And I think
and even for I mean, a lot of people think that just if the adverse effect is already known about, like, you know, sort of diarrhea or whatever it is, if it's a common effect or well-known effect, people think that those don't need to be reported, but those should be reported as well, because even for known effects, you know, we always need to learn more about, you know, the true frequency, how, you know, how often do they really happen, because that the number that we've got right at the beginning when something's first marketed, you know, again, it's based on a very small population. So, you know, the more we can understand about common adverse effects, the better. And also we can understand different things about which types of dogs are, you know, most likely to get the adverse effect. And, you know, the more we know, the more we can do things to prevent, use them in ways that prevent them occurring.
Yeah, definitely.
So continue.
So I think that's good. I think that tells people, you know, that we do the best we can with the information that's provided, and all of us take a responsibility in ensuring that that information pool continues to grow for the safety of the future generations of OA sufferers. So please, if you do have an adverse event, take 5 minutes of your time to either report it to your vet or even go independently online and report it yourself, and we can put a link after the event as well for people. So we talked a bit about non-steroidals, and I just want people to definitely don't get biased the fact that we're talking about adverse events and go, oh no, it's doomed. It's not like that. I did a post on a vet forum a few years ago saying, right, guys, you know, considering that you use non-steroidals every single day of your working career, considering that you're going to see all the adverse events come in, these sick animals that react so badly to these non-steroidals, would you put your own dog on a non-steroidal long term? And 200 vets replied, over 200, and 100% said yes. So just anybody that's going away with a fear in their pants, do not go away with fear in your pants, because if I saw so many adverse events, I would never put Luna on it, and I would quite happily use a non-steroidal on my dog. So let's move on. Let's move down the inflammatory cascade and talk about pip rants. Actually, sorry. We keep talking about efficacy. We've also got to talk about drug development of making them easier to use. And a recent occurrence has happened in the non-steroidal world, where about 5-10 years ago, we had a monthly non-steroidal. And then in a recent months, we've now got a weekly non-steroidal. So developments aren't just made in efficacy and minimizing adverse events. They're also massively developed to make sure that they're given appropriately for the best of that animal. So I don't know if you want to expand on that before we do pip rants.
I mean, do you want to go back to that other slide again with the list of drugs?
I do indeed.
Great.
Sorry, I need food.
So the ones in red are, you know, drugs that have most recently come to market. So so the one you're talking about, the one that's just come out, that's weekly, that's enflicoxib, brand name Daxocox. So that's got a W after it, saying it's weekly, because all the other ones are daily, apart from mavocoxib or trocoxil, which is monthly. That's been around for quite a long time. And I don't know whether it's also worth saying, because I've put the brand names after the generic name. I mean, all drugs, presumably everybody knows this, all drugs have got, all veterinary medicines anyway, generally have two names. They've got the generic name, which is the name of the active ingredient, and then a brand name. And for some of these non-steroidals, there are several brands of the same drug, like carprofen and metacam, because once when the patent has run out, which is usually between 10 and 20 years, anybody, you know, any company can come along and produce the same drug under a different brand name, and they can do that using all the safety and efficacy data of the original one. So some of those have, there'll be all various.
Meloxicam's the classic, isn't it? There's Meloxil, Loxicam,
loads of them.
Inflacam,
but they're all the same. Pretty much.
Can I also just say, adding to drug development to make more convenient, reliable use is a huge step in improved medical care. I read a statement that said, if we could actually use the medications that we have now more reliably, consistently, and according to data sheets, it's almost like an advancement in science. It's equivocal to a new development in drug category, because we're so bad at using our drugs on the timescales and appropriately that even if we just gave them at the right hour every day, it's almost like developing a whole new drug category. So when you get a development to make a drug more convenient for use, that's still a big thing, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah, that's right. And then, there are things like there's a lot of development in formulation, adding flavorings. Chewable tablets are becoming very, very popular now. Things that make it.
Do you remember Zubrin? Just to have a giggle, I can remember Zubrin came out, and it was a tablet that they'd made so it would stick to the roof of the mouth. So you get it on the tongue and then it'd stick so a dog couldn't spit it out. And that was its big marketing thing. The problem is when people put it into their dog's mouth, their fingers got wet and the tablet stuck to the finger.
Oh dear. All right.
So it never actually really took off, which was quite funny. Anyway.
That's not around anymore, is it?
No, it's not. It just didn't cut it. But I think for anybody that's listening now and thinking, do you know what, actually I don't give my medication at the same time every day, and I am not consistent, and I do let it slip 4 to 6 hours either way, and I might forget a couple of days, do go back to your vet and say, I'm not managing the medication how you want me to do it. Do I have choice? And you will probably find you do. You might be on a twice daily and you can go once daily. You might be on a once daily and you can go weekly. It might be that you even struggle with weekly and you want to go monthly. So that's a big key message, guys. Do go back to vets and have a chat with them and say, I'm not keeping up with the dosing regime, so I'm not giving this drug a chance.
Yeah. And another thing I'd mention, you were saying about, sticking to the sort of instructions that come with the medicine. Another thing is that is important in relation to a couple of these, and that's whether you give it with food or on an empty stomach. So those two that are long acting, the Daxocox and Chocoxil, they should be given with food because they're much better absorbed that way. Whereas, but this isn't an NSAID, Gabapentinoids, that should be given on an empty stomach. So, and not giving it in the right way can affect how well it's going to work because, sufficient amounts of the drug won't be absorbed unless you stick to.
I've become a lot more respectful of dosing regimes and sticking to data now that I run CAM. I think you can become a bit complacent, but it really does make a difference. Let's go on to the PIPRANTs. So we're going to be talking in this category now, guys. And can you explain why PIPRANTs were developed and what's special about them?
Can you go back to that? Would you mind going up onto the other?
I certainly can.
Yeah, that one. Yes. Now you're saying PIPRANTs, but there's only one PIPRANT that I'm aware of anyway. That's on the market anyway so far. There may be others waiting in the wings, but that's Gabapentinoids. Yeah. So this slide is showing the pathway for prostaglandin synthesis. The prostaglandins, the sort of the inflammatory substance that we're trying to block. So you can see in red there, sort of at the near the top of the slide, that shows where NSAIDs are acting by inhibiting COX, which is quite high up in the pathway. But lower down in the pathway, you can see as a result of those the action of those enzymes, various different substances are produced which have different effects in the body. Whereas, I don't know if you can see it, there's a sort of a thing over the bottom side, but where grapiprant there is right at the bottom, it acts very specifically on a particular type of receptor with which a particular prostaglandin interacts, the EP4 receptors. So grapiprant, again, developed with the hope of producing something that was going to be effective in reducing pain and inflammation, but with avoiding the typical adverse effects. So adverse effects from a more sort of general action. So that's what grapiprant is. Grapiprant, though, in studies hasn't been found to have an anti-inflammatory effect. It just has, in studies, been found to have a pain-relieving effect. And I think in the clinical trials, it appears to maybe have a different side effect profile from NSAIDs, but it's still a relatively new drug.
It's been around for what, 5 years?
Probably now, yeah. I think, was it 2016, 2017?
I think it was the first time I met you. I think it was a London Vet Show or BSAVA.
Yes, you're probably right. Yeah, 5 years. Is it? Gosh. And
I think when it came out, this is just off the cuff, just of observation. It's not set in stone data. When it came out, I think a lot of people transferred over to it from a COX to selective, specific, whatever you want to call them. And I think some people were very happy and they felt that it maintained the same analgesic states and they didn't have side effects and they were much happier knowing how it worked. And I think a number of people after a few months decided to go back to the COX-2 specific that they were using because they didn't feel it offered the same. Now, that's just an observation, and it gives people the understanding you are flexible as an owner. If you are willing to trial different things, chat to your vet. I had a lady come to me today. Her dog's been on Metacam. She's been pretty happy with it. Every now and then, slightly loose stools. And so therefore, she said to me, look, I've kind of watched some CAM resources. I'd really like to try another one. I totally accept it. Might be better, might be worse, might be indifferent. I take heed. I understand that you can't give me a promise. And I said, right, cool, let's do it then. Let's do a 5-day washouts. We'll cover with paracetamol during that point. We'll minimize any impact forces so we have no incidental acute flares. And we'll reintroduce a different non-steroidal and we will use objective monitoring and see if we see improvement. You can do that, guys. But a lot of vets are really scared about offering it because just imagine if they made your dog worse. You'd lose faith in them, you'd lose faith in the medication, and they might lose you. So it's one of those really difficult situations. If you think, actually, I think I could possibly do better, I'd like to try a different one, have a chat with your vet about it.
Yeah. I mean, something I think is worth saying here is that, it would be really helpful if there were trials that compared these different groups of drugs so that we kind of know how they related to each other. But unfortunately, that that isn't done very much. So we don't really know, how they relate to each other and how they should be used relative to each other. There's that's something that, it would be great if there was more research into that.
And again, I think vets are only human, and you use what you're comfortable and experienced in using.
Exactly. Yes, that's right.
I will go to meloxicam as a first line on a regular basis because it's very convenient to give. It's a syrup. It tends to be well accepted, and I've used it for years.
Yeah. And that counts for a lot. Your familiarity with it is really important.
Yeah, exactly. But it doesn't mean that that person's dog might not be better on Simacoxib or it might be better on Thyrocoxib. It's about communication and kind of expressing that. Okay, so that's grapiprant is available. I know that it was definitely marketed towards dogs that are going to be on a long-term non-steroidal from an early point in their life. So I know a lot of vets will migrate towards it if they've got a juvenile that's going to be intermittently or long term on something. It just gives a bit of confidence. But as far as I know, I don't think there's any studies comparing its efficacy against the Coxibs on a reliable basis, is it? It's a bit of suck it and see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in studies, I'm just remembering from the review that we did of it, I think it wasn't effective in all dogs. And I think, if you know that at the start, then you won't.
Yeah. And we know that osteoarthritis isn't a very simple kind of pathway. All of these inflammatory mediators may be having a role elsewhere, and we're not even touching them. So is there argument that theoretically something higher up the inflammatory cascade, yes, might have more adverse events, but also may have more impact? So it is a case of good communication with your vet and everybody accepting pros and cons of decision making. Okay, let's move on to the next new. Whoop, here it is. Whoop, here it is. Whoop, here it is. This is the one that's causing everybody a lot of brain ache at the moment, isn't it? Monoclonal antibodies.
Monoclonal antibodies. Yes, right. So yeah, that's Librela or Bedinvetimab. Oh, I'd say something else about the generic names here, because you'll notice that a lot of the non-steroidals, there's a few, they represent sort of a few different sort of chemical groups there, but there are several there that end in coxib, because that's a sort of the common stem for the COX-2 selective NSAIDs. And so I just want to kind of say something about the advantage of kind of knowing, being familiar with the generic name, because it can often tell you something useful about, what the drug is. So anyway, with monoclonal antibodies, they always end in mab, helpfully, but maybe obviously. So Bedinvetimab is the monoclonal antibody for dogs, and there's one for cats now, Frunevetmab, and there's another one, because there are only three altogether, 3 veterinary monoclonal antibodies, and the other one is called Lokivetmab, and that's used in atopic dermatitis. So these are a new class of drugs. They're a new class of drugs in veterinary medicine, but they've been around in human medicine for a long time, and there's been an explosion in the number of monoclonal antibodies. In fact, I think, it seems like most of the new drugs that come out these days are a type of monoclonal antibody. They're used a lot to treat cancers and so on, and inflammatory diseases. And what they do is that they're designed to target specific protein in the body. So, it's seen as a very attractive way of trying to treat a disease and trying to, target a specific receptor or other protein. So, and we're likely to see many more monoclonal antibodies coming along, I should think. But that's what Bedinvetimab is. So, and Frunevetmab, the version for cats. So it is a type of antibody that will interact with nerve growth factor, and it prevents nerve growth factor from interacting with a receptor that is involved in pain. And that's what it does. It sounds very neat and simple. And
they're considered very safe, aren't they? Because they're a protein that the body's going to naturally break down over time. So they're not seen to cause huge adverse events. But however, we've done some data collection on Holly's Army, and we had over 600 to 700 owners kind of report in their findings, and there was an array of potential adverse events. Again, correlation and causation isn't the same. Just because someone's dog got diarrhea after having the injection doesn't necessarily mean it was related. But a lot of the findings were interesting, weren't they? It was fascinating.
Oh, well, I haven't seen that. No, take you. I'd heard that.
The one that
I haven't seen it. Yeah, no, I don't know what was seen, but it's fantastic that you've collected that data. That's wonderful. Yeah, you're right. It is because it's a protein. It'll be broken down in the body, so there won't be any metabolites or anything like that. Yet, there is an unknown, because nerve growth factor has many functions in the body, and it's not only involved in pain. Therefore, it may be not exclusively doing one thing. So again, it's really important that we
continue
to monitor. But yes, indeed, when it first came out, it appears to be they're very well. Not there was only one side effect on the in the product information, which is,
and that was just an itchiness and lump where the injection occurred. So it's an injection that's given every 4 to 6 weeks, isn't it? And some people are seeing good response after the first one. Some people are not seeing it till the third, and there are a cohort of people that are not seeing any benefit whatsoever. I think there's an array of potentially linked adverse events that are going to be investigated and correlated and reported upon. Yes, Lynn, I don't know if the Zoetis collation of data, now it's been on the market for over a year, is actually public yet. Have you seen anything about them?
No, I haven't seen that. But what happens with side effect information is that the company, yes, will collect any reports that are reported to it, and they are required to pass it on to the regulator. And the regulator requires all companies to do periodic reports about safety, and the regulator is is constantly monitoring, will be looking out for what they call signals, things where they're getting reports of lots of similar events, and they'll be monitoring those. So yeah, there's very close close eye kept on it.
Because lots of people are asking, because it is still causing a huge stir for owners, do you know anything about its availability coming back? Someone's just written here, vets got an update this week from Zoetis, restrictions being withdrawn from next week, I think. I haven't heard anything yet, so sorry, I don't know. Do you know anything?
No, I'm afraid I don't. I'm sorry, I don't know anything about. I don't know why there's a shortage. Is it because of the popularity? I mean, it has been very popular, but I'm afraid I don't know.
No, okay. So let's go back to this list. And do remember, guys, this Facebook Live is about giving you inspiration about how much there is out there that we can tap into. So, please go away going, oh, actually, this is very interesting. So we've done that. Now we go into like the unlicensed area. I don't think we're going to touch up across Pentazan and for tonight. We can come back to that another day. And again, we're not going to be able to cover all of these. From a first opinion vet, a lowly first opinion vet that I am, this list, I use all of it. I'm always looking at the pain cases, looking at what's changed, what's become more apparent. For example, let me give you an example. I've been treating a dog, and this week she said he's been doing really great, but he had an episode of left fore lameness that was way worse than ever before, and it was an acute lameness, and he held the paw up and he kind of sat there almost like and it took him a while to kind of get out of that, and he kind of limped home, and it took a while. And I'm thinking, that's not OA pain. That's something else going on there. So then we started having another reassessment, another palpation, and we've got a little bit of pain up in the cervical vertebrae. So we're thinking, actually, have we got a neuropathic component to this pain? So this dog that's been on a non-steroidal for its severe elbow OA, which we've assumed is the cause of that left fore lameness, things have appeared that make you go, well, actually, is there a comorbidity? Is there a more dominant source of discomfort? Do I need to tweak my drug protocol? So we've now added in a more gabapentin-based product, which is going to work on neurological transmission, so nerve transmission, which is neuropathic pain. So please remember, guys, pain isn't a light switch. It's not a simple circuit. It's always changing, and reassessments and rethinking and restructure is always relevant. Do you want to talk about something? Because we've already hit 50 minutes and we've got some questions to answer. Do you want to say anything about these meds here, or should we do it for another time?
Yeah, maybe for another time. Just to say, like you've been describing, pain is complex, and the idea of these other ones is that they work in different ways. They mainly affect nerve transmission. By the way, I put paracetamol in this list because although there is a license form, Pardale V, but that is only licensed for short-term acute pain. So generally, when it's being used for chronic pain, it's being used sort of off license. So that's why I put that over there. But yes, I mean,
Yeah.
and generally there's less evidence with these than there is with the non-steroidals, of course.
And this area, I definitely, when I'm talking to my clients, will be very sincere and say, none of these come with a promise. We're using our clinical reasoning from our clinical examination, your observations, my observations, logic, reason, and then we're going to bring them in. But what is absolutely imperative is your further observations in an objective manner. So, for example, the dog that I've just spoken about, that we're wondering if there's a neuropathic pain component, is there some cervical disc disease? She knows that these drugs are going to take a while to work. She knows that the signs might be subtle. The clinical signs improvement will be subtle. And she knows the onus is on her to be watching to see if there is improvement in different clinical signs, so that I can have the confidence to say, well, let's keep going on it. And I think a lot of people, when they're prescribed a medication, they just go, oh, well, it's going to work. It's going to work because that's it. It's drug. Got back. It doesn't work like that, sadly. So,
unfortunately, I mean, and drugs work a bit. I mean, drugs don't have really dramatic effects, and there is no cure at the moment for this. So yeah, they're going to work a bit.
And I think another thing I'd like to add to, because we will come back and do all these, we're going to hit questions quickly now, is there's a real tendency with chronic disease to think it's only home management. So people come to the vets and they get prescribed another pill. And there's definitely a move towards using parenteral, so injectables, and even constant rate infusions to try and get on top of pain. So the toolbox is amazing now, guys. It's really amazing. I love doing my pain clinics. It's such a buzz. So this is to inspire you. There is not just non-steroidals out there. Okay, so let's do some questions. Are you okay with that?
Sure, yeah.
Ready?
I promise I can answer any, but
that's all right. I'm getting a bit giddy because I've still got to go back to work. Right. Okay. So let's go up the list. I've seen reported on the Librela Experiences Group that FDA have not authorized the human version of Librela and don't intend to continue it. Is this something you should be considered when given to dogs? I can kind of answer that. You can answer that as well, though.
Well, yeah, there was one trastuzumab. That's the one, is it? I can't remember what it's called now. Yes. So it's been trialed in humans, but they found that when it was given long term and for several months in conjunction with non-steroidals, it caused a sort of a syndrome called, I can't remember what it's called. You remind me.
Rapidly progressive osteoarthritis.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if that's a reason why it hasn't been licensed. I mean, it's hard to know about what's going on when companies have applied for. That's all done in secret, the applications and so on. So who knows?
And I think was it like 19 or 20% of people that they were on a non-steroidal plus a monoclonal antibody, and it was over a significant period of time.
It was several, 3 months plus, something like that. And and it would have been, a few people, a certain number. So, but we've no idea what relevance that might have, if any, to the use of the monoclonal antibody in.
As far as I know, there's not been any evidence of it in any of the veterinary trials. And I just want to throw a little first opinion vet spanner in the works. Something that we have seen with Librela use is dogs responding very well, owners not understanding tissue healing, and therefore assuming that just because the pain's gone, the dog's capable of doing everything it used to do ever before. And then these dogs are running across meadows and trying to jump ditches, and they haven't got their strength, power, stability, mobility, balance that they once had. And then we're seeing a deterioration, not because of the drug and not a rapidly progressive OA, but soft tissue damage because they're doing too much too soon. So for us, and I find this with the literature with looking at acute flares, there's literature in humans because humans can verbalize the pain is definitely coming from within my joint. I feel like my joint is burning. I feel like it's on fire. It hurts to move. When we're dealing with animals, they don't tell us, and it could be pain from related tissues that are causing deterioration signs. So just do bear that in mind. This one. Is there any information on potential side effects of amantadine? I can only find human literature.
Well, I mean, not very much. I have to say, because we reviewed amantadine a few years ago, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but I only remember that that we don't know very much about dogs. But did I remember about vomiting is something, and I remember something about a way of kind of mitigating that as well. But I can't remember. But
I remember this, but I think there was diarrhea and vomiting.
Mm.
I personally have used it a lot, and I haven't had a huge array of adverse events. I've had lethargy. I've had people bulk at the expense.
Oh, really? All right. Okay.
Quite an expensive drug. Well, it was. For me to buy it for my cat was on Symmetril for quite a few years, and it was something like £200 a bottle.
Wow. I can quickly look up here and amantadine, see what we said about it.
Yeah, so I'll go on to the next one and then we'll come back to medicine. Can you give more info about a washout? We are trialing Galiprant after Previcox and Tramadol trials showed no effect. We just went from one to the next with no break in between. That does happen, Casper. You know, Casper Cali Dizzy. I wouldn't say that that's uncommon. It does happen, but theoretically, you should allow the drug to pass. So you need to get it. Andrew's got better terminology than me, but we want it out of the system prior to introducing another, partly because we wouldn't want two drugs of the same family working in the body at the same time.
Usually you say 5 times the half-life, and you know, so.
And explain to them what the half-life is.
Well, it's just a term used for when they do pharmacokinetic studies. So looking at when you stop a drug, it'll, you know, the blood levels will gradually come down. It's the time taken for it to decrease, the concentration to decrease by a half. So it's just used as a sort of a, you know, a way of expressing how long a drug is going to, you know, hang around in the body. So the most non-steroidals, I think, I can't remember. I can never remember facts like this off the top of my head, I'm afraid.
Well,
but
looking at what clinicians advise anything between 5 and 10 days, I've seen.
Yeah, well, that would be about, well, yeah. I mean, then you're safe. But if it was something like the long-acting, it's like mavacoxib, it's got a very, very long half-life. So, you know, you'd need to allow longer for that. But yeah, it's just to be really safe, really, for drugs that might. Although, I mean, I'd say that, you know, if you've got a, yeah, it's just to avoid things sort of building up. Yeah.
And confusion, you know, can you imagine if you didn't do a washout and then the dog, when introducing another drug, had an adverse reaction? Is that going to put you off using the first one or the last one?
That's
altogether?
true. Yeah, that's
adds
right.
clarity.
Yeah.
I think it's another reason a lot of first opinion vets are intimidated to offer swapping, because it feels inconvenient. It feels like you're going to allow breakthrough pain during that interim. There's a lot of uncomfortable conversations to do a swap. So be kind to your vet if you want to go down a trial pathway.
Again, it's weighing up risks and benefits, you know, and deciding the best course of action.
Yeah. Anything about amantadine before I move?
Oh, yes, here we are. Amantadine. So the adverse effects of amantadine in dogs not well studied. Some develop agitation, vomiting, flatulence, or diarrhea, which may be watery, particularly in the early days of amantadine therapy. Specialists avoid stopping amantadine if adverse signs occur, reintroducing it once they've resolved. And giving the drug with food may prevent vomiting.
Perfect.
So, yeah, there we go.
Okay, we're going to go to the next one because we're running out of time. I don't know of any trials that would be this specific about using Gabapentinoids with omeprazole.
No, which you mentioned should be given empty stomach. What effect does giving omeprazole have on this, and should it be given before or after? So I think this is for a dog that's taking omeprazole and Gabapentinoid. And so, well, omeprazole, that'd be a once a day thing. Yeah, I mean, I don't know off the top of my head.
I should imagine the theory is the proton pump inhibitor is going to reduce the acid in the stomach. Is that going to affect it?
Well, that's not, but it's going to reduce. I mean, omeprazole it suppresses acid production throughout the day, so that's not going to matter. But that, it is a good point. But omeprazole is usually gastroprotected, so it isn't absorbed in the stomach; it goes through to the small intestine. And yeah, I mean, I doubt that there have been any studies looking at whether gabapentinoid and omeprazole interact. I mean, it is a good point, but I don't know the answer to that. And
do you know how gabapentinoid's broken down and why it's chosen to give on an empty stomach, or did they just find in clinical trials it was more?
No, they found in clinical trials that it was better absorbed. Again, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I can.
I'll let you have a look when I go on to the next one. So this one's a good one. So you've been on a non-steroidal and was on Previcox for over 2 years, provided very good pain control, but then caused some severe tummy problems, sickness, pain, and altered stools. If that was a one occasion, then I would take that in consideration, because I've often had dogs that have had an upset. We've given them a break and we've reintroduced the non-steroidal and they're fine on it again. And it was a coincidence. It was a correlation with another virus and upset for another reason. Was put onto Medrone, which is much higher up that inflammatory cascade. So you're going to have, unfortunately, more adverse events from going from a non-steroidal up to a steroid, because it's higher up the inflammatory cascade. It's going to have more impact on more inflammatory mediators. 2 years, side effects are becoming much more troublesome. The side effects we tend to see is drinking, panting, muscular weakness, because it's catabolic. So you'll lose muscle tone, muscle strength. So you'll lose stability. So Librela started with a view to reducing the Medrone, but no improvement on week 7. It'd be interesting to know what improvements you're looking for. I've now got the habit of saying pain appears in 3 levels. And this is just a Hannah language, and it might help you. There's tier 1, which is very targeted. So it's, if I kicked you in the knee, your knee's hurting, and that's where it is. But then over, say, 2 or 3 weeks, if it was still painful, you've shifted your body weight, your posture's changed, you've started to get backache, you've got shoulder ache, you've got neck ache, and now it's affecting your capability. So that's tier 2. But then if it keeps going and you're starting to not go out because it's painful, you don't play your sports anymore, you don't get comfortable in bed, it causes emotional suffering, and that's tier 3. So you've got these different levels that pain can impact your life. And it would be interesting to know if Librela actually reduced emotional suffering and your dog was brighter and wanting to be more with you, but their capability didn't change because they've probably been on Medrone and had muscle wastage, and they've got neurological deficits because of long-term OA. So reinvestigate whether your Librela actually did have impact, with maybe a little bit more realistic end point, what you're expecting to see. No, I don't think it would be a huge risk to try another NSAID. And to be honest, if you didn't have too troublesome time on Previcox, I wouldn't be scared to go back to it. But you are going to look to do a good solid washout if you've been on a steroid. You'd need to have a significant amount of time off the steroid, because steroids and non-steroidals do not like each other at all. But in your case, I would say, have you investigated complementary therapies? Have you tried massage? Have you tried laser, physio, hydro, all these other things? Make sure you look into lifestyle, look at your exercise levels, etc. There's so much more to do. Can you add to that?
No, I think that's very comprehensive.
I've got verbal diarrhea today. This one, I think we've covered it, really. We don't know.
Yeah, well, they have to. There's a sort of a time scale in which they need to report. I think, I don't know what the new drugs, whether it's every 6 months, every year, something like that. But they have, there's an arrangement with the regulatory authority where they have to, report every so often. So and the VMD reports once a year on the sort of the adverse effects of the previous year. And if anything comes along which they feel, is significant, it'll be added to the summary of product characteristics. And they they do those updates, as and when. So if something comes along and requires that a change, it'll be that. When I say summary of product characteristics, I mean the product information. That happens whenever they discover something new that needs to be added.
Cool. Okay. Did you find anything about gabapentinoids and its?
Oh, really? Just that it is quickly absorbed from the GI tract, but it's readily and rapidly absorbed. But food does reduce the total amount of drug that's absorbed. So, I mean, how that relates to omeprazole, I don't know, because unless somebody's done studies to show that omeprazole reduces the absorption of gabapentinoid, we don't know. But I don't. That doesn't have any effect on. That doesn't influence the information about giving with food, giving without food. It doesn't mean you should give it with food instead of without food. So, yeah.
I think it's just that they've, as you say, they probably haven't elucidated exactly why it's better without food. It's just been an observation in the trials. Let's go for this one. Would be interested to know if you feel use of gabapentin can exacerbate more neuro problems in some dogs. And from my perspective as a clinician, I know that gabapentin can cause wobbliness. The technical term of wobbliness can cause lethargy, it can cause a bit of apathy, and therefore you've got a dog that, if it had neurological deficits, can certainly look worse. Many of these dogs will learn, their body will begin to tolerate gabapentin, and over time you won't get those adverse events, and you get the benefit of the drug without the adverse events. But can you add to that, Andrea?
No, not really. I mean, it is a drug that has effects on neurotransmission, so it's likely to have, possibly have side effects. But no, I don't know very much. We haven't reviewed gabapentin, and I personally, I don't know a lot about its use in dogs.
No, I think it's one of those things that, again, like non-steroidals online, there's so much wicked information of it being the devil's drug, and you're like, rise above it, guys. I've had some dogs they would have been put to sleep if we hadn't put them on gabapentin, and it's had such a pronounced improvement upon their life. Again, it's another kind of individual drug. Has there been any research to see if different breeds respond differently?
Well, that's a very good point, and that's another thing about clinical trials, because the early studies in dogs usually done in healthy, usually beagles, and then dogs are genetically very different. Different breeds are genetically very different to each other, and really we don't know a great deal about how different breeds react to different drugs, and that's another thing. That's another reason for reporting adverse effects and so on, so that we can learn if some breeds are more prone to them, predisposed to them than others, and so on. We do know things about, for example, this is nothing to do with osteoarthritis, but for example, certain parasiticide drugs, some certain dogs are more prone to the side effects of those than others, and it's likely to be the case with other drugs in other ways, but nothing has, we don't. You'd think that if that was the case with non-steroidals, that we might have heard about that by now. But,
yeah, this one's a good one because basically, Ella, they're very different drugs doing different things on the pain carpet. People call it the pain pathway, and I've decided to call it the pain carpet because it's an interwoven Aladdin's carpet, and these drugs all do very, very different things. And no one can tell you if it's a good combination, only your dog's response to it.
Yeah. But in a condition like that, it does make sense to use things that act in different ways, because you're getting more benefit, but without, as long as they haven't got similar side effects, you're getting more benefit, but without more side effects. Like in humans, we use, ibuprofen with paracetamol, because they work in slightly different ways.
Yeah. I'm going to make this the last one because I think we're beginning to flag, and we've got plenty more opportunity, because one of the great things about Andrea is she's a CAM advisor. I managed to twist her arm and persuade her to come and join the CAM team. We're very, very lucky. We now have 16 world-class advisors across all the different disciplines involved in OA, from pharmaceuticals to surgery to rehab to nutrition to physio. We've even got a human psychologist to help us with making decisions in anticipatory grief, dealing with, a diagnosis. So it's a freaking awesome team, and Andrew's part of it. So this is the last question we're going to take. What do you think of this one?
I can't read it all. Oh, is that the end of it?
Yeah.
My tummy issues and allergies for arthritis. So pred meaning prednisolone?
Yes, I believe so.
Right. Okay. And tummy issues would mean what?
So that's probably GI issues, I would imagine. So maybe some kind of inflammatory bowel disease.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Only been prescribed, and no non-steroidals or anything.
From a clinician perspective,
yeah.
and being just an honest clinician behind a table in a 15-minute small consult room consultation, that clinician is potentially trying to kill 100 birds with one stone, because you've got tummy issues, which is potentially immune mediated, and prednisolone would be suitable. We've got allergies, which is going to be immune mediated, which prednisolone would be suitable. And prednisolone is a potent anti-inflammatory. However, it wouldn't be the first port of call for osteoarthritis. So yes, it will do the trick, and it will give you a response. And it was what we used to use a lot in many years gone past. But it wouldn't necessarily be your ultimate choice. If this was a case that came to see me, I might speak to you about investigating more into the tummy issues, trying to elaborate what is the underlying allergy. Could this case become more of a cytopoint, which is a monoclonal antibody for allergic skin disease? Could this be a hydrolyzed diet for our IBD? And does that open up the window for us to then try a different anti-inflammatory for the OA? But as you can see, I've gone from one bullet that does all to 3 very different bullets, which is going to take a lot more time, energy, and expense. So I can totally understand what your clinician's doing. I totally respect it. I think you need to go back to them and have a chat. Fair? There you go. That's the difficulties of giving online advice when you haven't seen the case. I can totally see why that clinician's done that. Right, guys. I'd like to say an absolute thank you to Andrea for coming. I'm so sorry I was late.
It's okay.
It's been one of those days. We will be back next week. So thank you so much for listening. Please say thank you to the lovely Andrea. It's always nice to get praise for giving up our time to go and help you guys. Please do support CAM, and we have a shop. You can donate. You can leave us a nice review. You can do one of our courses. Please go and look into veterinary prescriber. If you're a veterinary professional, do go and check it out. It is a really fantastic resource, and we'll put a link below. And until next week, thanks a lot, guys. See you later.
Bye, and hope you don't have too hard a night being on